Okay, so we have reached the level 4. We are dealing with word problems now. So, number 1, you are constructing a frame for a rectangular photo shown. You want the frame to be the same width all the way around, and the total area of the frame and photo to be 391. What should the outer dimensions of the frame be? So we are talking about the area of this whole figure is 391. All right, we see that our photo is 11 by 17 inches, and our width of our frame is x inches. So this length is going to be the same as an x plus 17 plus another x. So a 2x plus 17. And this length is going to be the same as an x plus an 11 plus an x. So a 2x plus 11. And I want the area of that whole big rectangle because that would be the area of the frame and the photo combined, which we want the area of the frame and the photo combined to be a 391. So if I take my length, which is that 2x plus 17, and I multiply by my width, which is a 2x plus 11, that would give me the area, which is a 391. So I'm going to need to FOIL. So doing a FOIL here, I wind up with a 4x squared plus a 22x plus a 34x plus a 187 is equal to 391. Now, to solve this quadratic equation, it's up to you what method you want to use, whether you want to use factoring or completing the square or the quadratic formula. But for the purpose of reviewing all of those methods, I'm going to show you each method again in this level 4, and I'm just going to start with factoring. So let's go ahead and let's use factoring to help us solve this quadratic equation. In order to factor, I do need to combine like terms, and I also need to set this equation equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 391 from both sides. So I have a 4x squared plus a 56x minus a 204 is equal to 0. Once you have your equation set equal to 0, if you are using factoring, you need to decide between the x or the box method. You are more than welcome to use the x method on this problem. However, you may have noticed that there's a GCF of 4. So if I divide every single term by 4, it does not change the value of my equation, it just changes how it looks. A 4x squared divided by a 4 would be a 1x squared. A 56x divided by a 4 would be a plus 14x. And a negative 204 divided by a 4 is a minus 51. And a 0 divided by a 4 is a 0. So now, instead of being forced to use the x method on this problem, I can actually use the box method. So I'm going to draw my box. I have to split up my x squared. I need two numbers when multiplied together equal negative 51, but when added together equal positive 14. That's going to be a 17 and a negative 3. So what that means is that we have the binomials x plus 17 times an x minus a 3 is equal to 0. Using the zero products property, if I set x plus 17 equal to 0, I would get x is equal to a negative 17. If I set x minus 3 equal to 0, I would get x is equal to 3. Now, since we're dealing with the word problem, we need to go back and determine which x value can be true. X is a width of a frame. A width of a frame cannot be negative. You cannot have a negative length. So x must be 3, which they are asking for the outer dimensions of the frame. So if x is 3, if I do a 2x plus a 17, that's going to be a 2 times a 3 plus a 17, which is going to give me a 23 inches. And same thing over here, 2x plus 11, a 2 times a 3 plus an 11 would give me 17 inches. So my dimensions of my frame are 23 by 17 inches. Moving on to number 2, we have a batter striking a baseball, and the equation that represents the path where x is the horizontal distance in feet the ball travels, and y is the height in feet of the ball. And we want how far from the batter will the ball land. What that means is if the ball is landing, that means the height of the ball would be 0 feet because the ball hit the ground. So we're going to put 0 in for y. And now we want to find x, how far away from the ball, from the batter, horizontally did the ball go? And now for this one, I'm going to review with you the quadratic formula, which is x is equal to the opposite of b, so that's going to be a negative 0.7, plus or minus the square root of b squared, a 0.7 squared is a 0.49, minus 4 times my a value of negative 0.005 times my c value, which is a 3.5, all over 2 times my a value, which again is negative 0.005. A reminder, when using the quadratic formula, it's probably best to first simplify what's underneath your square root and also simplify your denominator before we type everything in for our calculator. So if x is equal to a negative 0.7 plus or minus the square root of 0.56 all over a negative 0.01. All right. When I type this into my calculator, I put parentheses, negative 0.7 plus the square root of, and your calculator puts in this set of parentheses, and you type in 0.56, close your parentheses twice, and then you do divided by negative 0.01. And you get approximately equal to a negative 4.8. Now doing that again, do parentheses negative 0.7 minus the square root of 0.56, close your parentheses twice, divided by negative 0.01, you get 144.8. Now we're talking about the distance that the ball went horizontally. Now you cannot have a negative distance, so the negative 4.8 does not make sense in context of the situation. So instead, we are going to use the 144.8 feet. That is our answer. All right, the next problem. We have the length, width, and height of a box are 2, 2x, and 3x minus 5 inches. The volume of the box is 276 inches. We want to find the height of the box. So volume is your length times your width times your height. And that would equal our volume of 276. So we're going to multiply these things out. A 2 times a 2x is a 4x. And then that's going to be multiplied by my 3x minus 5. So a 4x times a 3x gives us a 12x squared. A 4x times a minus 5 gives us a minus 20x. And then we have equals 276. Now if we were doing this by factoring or the quadratic formula, we would need to set this equal to 0. but I want to review with you completing the square. And so with completing the square, we keep our constant on this side because it's alone on one side, and that's what we want. With completing the square, though, your coefficient of x squared must be 1. So I'm going to divide every term by 12. So I have an x squared minus, and a 20 divided by a 12. We're actually going to leave as an improper fraction, and that is going to be a 5/3. X is equal to, and a 276 divided by a 12 is a 23. 5/3 in your calculator is 1.6 repeating, and I do not want you to round within your problem, so we leave it as a fraction. Now we take our b value, which is negative 5/3, and we divide by 2, or in this case, since it is a fraction, we're going to multiply by 1/2. And then we square that number. A negative 5/3 times a 1/2 is a negative 5/6. And then squaring that, a negative 5 squared is a 25, a 6 squared is a 36. I'm going to add that to both sides. Okay. Now on the left side I factor by taking the square root of my first term, which would be x, the square root of 25/6, which would be a 5/6, and the operation in between my first and second term, which is a minus sign, and I square that binomial. Now a 23 plus a 25/36, I need to write 23 as an improper fraction with a denominator of 36. So a 23 times a 36 is an 828. And an 828/36 plus a 25/36 is an 853/36. Now I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I get an x minus a 5/6 is approximately equal to a positive or a negative. And if I do the square root of 853 divided by 36, I wind up with it's about 4 point, it does say to round to the nearest tenth, so 4.9. Now I'm going to convert the 5/6 into a decimal. That is about a 0.8. Lastly, I add that 0.8 to both sides, and I wind up with approximately equal to a positive 4.9 plus a 0.8 gives me a 5.7, and a negative 4.9 plus a 0.8 gives me a negative 4.1. Now, x represents part of your width or height, which cannot be negative. So x must be in 5.7. But what they want to know is they want the height of the box, which is this 3x plus 5. So if I do 3 times 5.7 minus 5, I get my height, which gives me a 12.1 inches. All right. And then the next problem, a rescue helicopter hovers 68 feet above a jet ski in distress and drops a life raft. The height in feet of the raft above the water is given by the following equation. Determine how long it will take for the raft to hit the water after being dropped from the helicopter. Hitting the water means that we're going to have a height of 0. So I'm going to set my h equal to 0, and now I have a quadratic equation that I'm going to solve. Now on this quadratic equation, my b value is 0, so I'm going to use the square root method by first subtracting 68 over, then dividing by negative 16 on both sides, Then taking the square root, I only use the positive version because time can't be negative.